Hi folks, welcome to my channel or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed and registered dietitian nutritionist and online nutrition coach. And today we are talking about why intuitive eating doesn't work. Now I want to make this very clear before we move forward. I love intuitive eating so much. It is amazing. The reason why I'm creating this video though is because I have heard so many people say how intuitive eating didn't work for them, doesn't make sense for them, how they tried it and it just wasn't something for them. I can understand there's not going to be an approach that works for everyone. Like, we know that people are different. However, I have never come across it. This is just personally, I'm only talking for myself. I have not come across somebody who has said that intuitive eating did not work for them, who also has read the book or even knew that there was a book about it, who knew that there was a framework that defines intuitive eating. And they were just kind of putting their own definition of what intuitive eating means and looks like to them. I completely understand that. And I can see how it can be really like just natural to have to put a definition of what makes sense for you to what intuitive eating looks like for you. But the problem is that it is an actual framework. So I know that this title is very clickbaity, but I did that very intentionally because it will not work if you're putting your own, or it might work, but you're not giving it a fair chance. Someone is not giving it a fair chance if they're putting their own definition of what intuitive eating means when it has a framework already. So that's what we're digging into today. Let's go. So again, not everything is going to work for everybody, but at least knowing what intuitive eating actually is can be really helpful for determining whether or not it would be appropriate. I'm going to just go into the history a little bit. Intuitive eating is an approach to health and food that has nothing to do with dieting, meal plans, discipline, or willpower. It teaches you how to get in touch with your internal body cues like your hunger, your fullness, and satisfaction levels while learning how to trust your body around food. As I mentioned in the very beginning, I have a very deep love for intuitive eating. It was a book that I read when I was still in school, and it completely changed how I viewed kind of the application of everything that I was learning in school. As you can see, like all of the notes that I have in here is kind of wild, and also the intuitive eating workbook. I've gained so much personal growth from these books and from the authors. So intuitive eating was created in 1995 by two registered dietitians, Evelyn Tripoli and Elise Resch. And they wrote that book based on their experience working with clients. Intuitive eating is really a framework that shifts the focus of implementation of nutrition from this kind of rule or restrictive piece into a behaviorism focused framework. Intuitive eating is not just about eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. You are learning how to rely on those internal cues of hunger and satiety, but you're also learning about your energy levels, your mental clarity, your stress levels. So much more is taken into account than just saying eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. It's so much more than that. One of the biggest misconceptions that I see about intuitive eating is that it is all about eating whatever you want in however amount, like all the time, and that's gonna lead to somebody having donuts for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and for snacks, and just that's all they're gonna eat. Like, I've heard that kind of argument of, if I did eat intuitively, if I let myself have whatever I want, then I would just eat cake and cookies and like whatever, things like that. However, while it's true that intuitive eating does really strip away those kind of rules and restrictions around those more energy dense foods and maybe less nutrient dense foods, like I understand that piece. However, it's also about respecting your body and really learning about what makes your body feel good. And at the beginning, that can be very confusing, but eating donuts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with nothing else and for your snacks, that's not going to really help the body physiologically feel good. And so if somebody were to do that for, a day or so, they're probably, maybe that they feel fine that first day, but it's probably going to catch up with them. And so intuitive eating is so much more than just giving this it is giving this full access. However, it is also tapping into how your body is feeling. And that itself itself is a skill. Intuitive eating is a dynamic interplay of your intuition, but it's also taking into account the context surrounding it and what we know about nutrition and what we know about what makes us feel good. And a good example of this is, let's say you are very stressed out or you are sick, whatever. Like, there are times, or even after intense physical activity, there are times when we might not feel hungry, but we can know by thinking that we actually do need to eat. Our bodies do need nourishment, and we might not be that hungry, but we still know that we have to take care of our body in that way and to eat. And so it's not just about this kind of eating when you're hungry and also like giving full rein on everything without having that kind of internal context and that internal dialogue to see what actually am I feeling? Why am I eating? What sounds good? Like, what will satisfy me? What will give me energy? What do I need this food to do for me? So it's really about taking you and putting you in the driver's seat to creating a plan that really works for whatever you need food to do for you, whether it's to manage your energy levels, to just give you some joy, to manage medical nutrition therapy needs. There's also this kind of idea that if we're just taking this intuitive eating approach and eating whatever, whenever, that it's going to lead to people being unhealthy, when that is not the case. We are taking into account the medical nutrition therapy needs. It fits like perfectly within intuitive eating. That is achieved by integrating messages from your body, and we can still gather information from recommendations as far as like what we need to do for certain medical conditions and what makes our bodies to move well and to feel good. Like, we can take all of those into context and not have it be this kind of like all or nothing approach. The intuitive eating framework talks about body food congruence. That represents how food feels in your body, how you're feeling overall. That is a skill. That is what interoceptive awareness is. That interoceptive awareness causes you to take an approach where you are honoring what sounds good, like what makes your taste buds feel great, but also, or taste great, but also how your body feels, and not just immediate, but also longer term. That food body congruence is so important and so helpful for setting the stage of increasing self-care and also increasing self-compassion. I've talked about self-compassion before. It is not a pass for just letting yourself go. I'm going to leave a link for Dr. Kristen Neff. She is a professor out of UT in Austin, Texas. I love her work. I've been following her for several years, and the work that she has put into self-compassion has been just amazing and something that I've learned a lot from. She describes compassion or self-compassion as having 3 different elements. She also talks about what self-compassion is not. How self-compassion does not include this kind of destructive self-indulgence kind of behavior, because that's not truly body kindness. That's not really being truly helpful to you. And so this is really where like learning about what intuitive eating means, what self-compassion means, and realizing that it's not this kind of like let yourself go thing. It's not. And so we can have this kind of intuitive eating approach with the framework that we're going to talk about and have it support our health, have it support our labs, things that we can actually test to see if we are getting healthier, if we're moving in a healthy place. Now, intuitive eating is not a diet, as I mentioned, and it's weight neutral. And so the outcome of that could be, for some people, they might see a weight change. They could, depending on where they're at, what they're doing, what the process of coming to terms of fully integrating that framework, they might see a reduction in their body weight. They might see an increase in their body weight. They might stay the same in their body weight. That is not the point of intuitive eating. It's really talking about the behaviors that support that health, as we talk about in like every single video, the definition, which is that physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being. And so what I also wanted to mention, because this channel is very science-based, I like giving you the receipts, I like giving you the resources. The science behind intuitive eating is amazing. I have so much anecdotal evidence of intuitive eating, but that doesn't mean very much when we're talking about science, right? Like, I always talk about how I'm not a big fan of anecdotal evidence, and there is a time and place to use that. But the good thing about intuitive eating is that there is actually over 100 studies on it. So with the 100 research studies, they have shown benefits to intuitive eating. Now, these include higher self-esteem, better body image, more satisfaction with life, optimism and well-being, proactive coping skills, higher HDL cholesterol levels, which you might have heard as like HDL is the good cholesterol, even though it's a little more complicated than that, lower triglyceride levels, lower rates of emotional eating, and lower rates of disordered eating. I will leave a link to the resources, to the studies in the description box so you can check those out. But intuitive eating has a lot of research behind it, and so that is one reason why I think that we should also give it a fair shot as to looking into the framework and not just putting our own kind of definition on it. So let's talk about those 10 principles of intuitive eating. I'm going to briefly go over them. However, I encourage you, if you are interested in intuitive eating, even if you have tried it in the past but not really without the framework, I highly encourage you to check out either the actual book or the workbook. Let's talk about the 10 principles of intuitive eating. So the first principle is rejecting the diet mentality. So what that means is throwing out dieting books, magazine articles that offer you the false hope of losing weight quickly, easily, and permanently. And also to get angry at diet culture that promotes weight loss and lies that have led you to feel as if you were a failure every time a new diet stopped working and you gained back all of the weight. It is so frustrating how much, especially this time of year, throughout the whole year, there is this kind of dieting message, this kind of dieting mentality that this diet is going to fix it all, that this diet is going to help you to lose the weight and to keep it off. And what we see is that a lot of times there's this kind of yo-yo diet approach. It's really just frustrating seeing all of these diets, and it's not just around this time of the year. I've seen so many dieting ads right now, but throughout the whole year, just seeing this kind of culture, this kind of industry profiting so much off of people's insecurities and off of people's pain. But it's just basically about rejecting this kind of idea that there is going to be this diet that's just waiting around the corner that's going to make everything all good again. The next principle is honoring your hunger. Now, this one takes into account the idea of it's okay to eat and that you don't have to have this kind of restriction where you are hungry throughout the day. Now, there is nothing wrong with being hungry at certain times. I feel like sometimes it can help with the satisfaction of a really awesome meal. However, it's the difference of, you only have X amount of macros or this amount of portion, and like once you're done, you're done. Like, you can't have any more food. That's what it's rejecting. It's about honoring your hunger. Let's say if you are going to eat this amount of lunch on this day, maybe the next day, depending on what happened the previous day or whatever, you might be extra hungry that next day for whatever reason. That is okay. Even though you normally eat this amount of food and that normally fills you up, it makes you feel great. Another day, you might need to have a little bit more food. And so that's really what like the honoring your hunger means. And it also takes into account, they recognize that sometimes we won't have that hunger. That doesn't mean that we don't have to eat, like some people when they're super stressed, or if they do have any kind of disease or certain like sickness that can kind of mask some hunger cues. And so it's taking that into account as well. The third principle is making peace with food. Now, this is the piece where we begin to not have those food rules as far as, if you're not allowing yourself to have ice cream or a donut or anything like that. A lot of times what happens is this kind of before starting a diet, what they call this kind of Last Supper mentality kind of creeps in, where you're just having everything in sight, having everything that won't be on your plan just because so you want to like get it out of your system. Another way that can show up is by having this kind of binge and restriction kind of pendulum where it's on different sides, opposite sides of the spectrum, where you are having this kind of diet and you have all of this restriction. And these food rules, you're pulling up yourself over here on a pendulum. As soon as you have a bite or you're off the diet or whatever, that pendulum is going to swing to the other side. And a lot of times what we see is this kind of consumption past what that person would normally consume, and where they feel physically uncomfortable from the amount of consumption from that food. And so making peace with food is really about seeing that food neutrality that I've talked about in previous videos, that food neutrality of seeing the positives of all foods, and also how those foods might not fit into always being positive, right? And so taking that into context and allowing yourself to have that freedom. And again, part of the framework is about learning how to trust yourself. And an example that I've used a couple times before is that dieting is a lot like, or getting rid of dieting is a lot like getting outside from underneath the water. A lot of times you can kind of think about being on a diet as like being underwater and breathing through a straw. You're gonna be having very shallow breaths, but you're still gonna be alive, right? But after you get out of the water and you're not limited to getting your air out of a little straw, you're probably gonna have naturally very deep breathing going on. Your body is trying to compensate for all of the lack of oxygen that you were getting when you were underwater. Now, this is only for a certain amount of time. Once your body kind of gets into a level where it's comfortable and it's no longer having that restriction, then your breathing will go back to normal. Your breathing will be more regular as far as the consumption of oxygen goes. And so a lot of times with diets, people will see that once they get out of the diet or out of the water, they'll have so many things past their comfort. And that is a very uncomfortable place to be. It's very scary. A lot of times this is where people will find themselves out of control and want to go back underwater because it's safe and they can control it there. But it's really important to work through that piece when they just get out under the water and have that kind of what feels out of control, because that is very important for getting to that balance piece of that pendulum. Because after you let it swing for a little bit, it'll stay in that middle range. That is really a healthy place to be.
Hi folks, as I was editing this, I realized that I completely skipped over number 4, which is actually one of my favorite ones. All of these are amazing, but number 4 is one of the ones that I really like to talk about. Really funny that I forgot to mention it in this video, but anyway, it is challenging the food police. Basically about recognizing those thoughts in your head that kind of say that you're either being good or you're being bad based on what you're eating, when we know that food is not a moral thing. It's not a good or bad thing. It doesn't make you good or bad. It's not a moral thing. It's food. So recognizing and challenging those beliefs is what this specific principle is about. And once we're able to kind of change those thoughts, we can really begin to have those food ally kind of thoughts, but helping us make the decisions that are the best for us within that context. Taste and joy is also included in that context. So when we're able to really challenge the food police thoughts, we're able to move away from more of the guilt-provoking thoughts around food and move to a more empowered and food ally voice.
Number 5 is discovering the satisfaction factor. So fullness does not equate to satisfaction. You can technically be full from eating a giant bowl of veggies, but you might not feel really satisfied. And so it's important to have both the idea of being full and also satisfied for having a really long-term healthy approach to your meals. That satisfaction piece is more of that pleasure and having that enjoyment with the food versus just having that fullness piece. And the satisfaction is one of my favorite things because we're human and I love that piece of nutrition. I've talked before on when we're making nutrition plans and implementing them, we need to look more than just at the biochemistry and anatomy, physiology, and genetics. And we need to pair that together really with all of the social sciences. That humanity piece is really key for just enjoying life, I think, in my opinion. And also it's really helpful and important for that long-term long-term focused, healthy approach. Number 6 is all about feeling your fullness. A lot of times when we're able to have those foods, like tune into those foods that really help us to feel good, we're having that balance, we're getting in really nutrient dense foods and also fun foods. We can rely on our hunger and our fullness for those kind of foods, and really just learning about where is it that you feel best after eating on that fullness spectrum, that you feel like you have the most energy, that you feel like you can think the best, that you feel the best. What is that point? At that point, that's a good place to kind of just rest and move to a different activity. Maybe not like rest from like actual resting in a bed or on a chair or anything, but just taking a break from eating at that point and moving to a different activity that allows you to use that energy and that focus in the most appropriate way. Number 7 is coping with your emotions and kindness. So emotional eating often gets this kind of bad idea around it of that we should never do it and that it's bad, but really emotional eating can tell us a lot about what we're experiencing. It can give us a really important cue that we need to kind of look inward and figure out what is a chain of events, what is really triggering that, and to see if it's helpful, to see if it's providing more positives and negatives. Then, is there really a reason to change it? Or if it is providing more negatives than it is positives, then in that case, it wouldn't truly be body kindness. And so that's something that we can maybe look at to do maybe a different activity that is going to help you to work through that emotion while still helping your overall well-being. It's really the idea of seeing food as a source of joy, but also recognizing what it can offer, what it also cannot offer. And what it cannot offer at all times is this kind of fixing of your life and fixing everything. Like, food has its place and it can bring us joy and it can give us a little bit of comfort and relief at times, but it's not going to fix everything. And so it's really about taking that kind approach and recognizing where is the line, what's kind of going on, what is the best option for your well-being. Number 8 is respecting your body. Respecting doesn't mean that you need to fully be in love with it. What respecting really means, or what it can mean, is that you are going to put some energy into nourishing it, that you are going to try to put some energy into listening to it, and really just having that respect of treating your body in a way that's overall nourishing. And sometimes that includes those fun foods too. Recognizing that everybody is different. We're gonna look different. I can have the exact same intake of food as somebody else and they can look completely different than how I look. And that's part of just recognizing your uniqueness. You might not always love that. Loving your body is not a prerequisite for respecting your body. But the more that we can respect our bodies, the more that we tend to learn how to love our bodies. This one can be really difficult if somebody has struggled and has dealt with physical trauma in the past. And this is one really where, depending on what the person's case is, I'm definitely not shy. I'm 100% okay with referring to mental health professionals, because sometimes when you start to do work into putting like what respect looks like for your body, that can bring up some traumatic kind of thoughts. And so that is something that is outside of my scope of practice. There are certain pieces where we can read about it and we can learn to implement. But I would say if you do have a history of certain things in your past physically, then maybe working through this one with a mental health professional who has experience in that specific area would be really helpful. Number 9 is about movement and really feeling the difference. It's really about having this kind of intentional activity, intentional movement that is fun for you, that makes you feel good. If you think about kind of as kids, they just kind of move their bodies, they just kind of play and do things that is fun for them. Like, kids don't need to have this kind of set activity, they just kind of do the activity. And so having this kind of approach of just having fun with your movement is really helpful for that long-term piece. If you focus on how you feel around that, that can help make the difference of getting out and going for that walk and, you know, feeling great with that versus just hitting the snooze button or, you know, working out later in the day or anything like that. Moving on to the last one. The last principle is honoring your health. And this is really where gentle nutrition comes into play. Gentle nutrition is really coming from a place of using food as self-care versus restriction or like a place of control. It's really about learning how to recognize which foods make you feel best, learning how to put the foods together in a way that helps your energy work best. This is where we can put some more of those medical nutrition therapy needs. If you have any food allergies, if you have any food sensitivities, we can still like apply those to this kind of framework. So those are the 10 principles of intuitive eating. If you did not know that there was a framework around intuitive eating, because intuitive eating, I can totally understand how somebody can just hear that and think of, you know, just listen to my body. But really, if you don't have the built skills into what that looks like, then yeah, it's probably not going to work. So let me know if you learned anything about intuitive eating in this video. I would love to hear it. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you next time. All right, bye.